Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today let's go over the market, see what happened, and pretty much figure out what is going to happen for the rest of the week as close as we can. As usual, if you enjoy, find these find these videos useful or whatever, don't forget to hit that like button, guys. It does help quite a bit. So Tesla ending the day down just pretty much 0.5%, just under $700 at 699.35. And today, guys, pretty much went as expected. Exactly what I predicted happened, pretty much, actually. I did say how I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of entered below 700 region, probably like around 690. We ended up going as low as 685. I did say between 690 and 685, but pretty much exactly what I predicted happened, right? We went in this little area, came back up, pretty much went sideways for the whole day, had another little down, dip at the end of the day, and then we rallied up and then pretty much ended exactly where we were trading the majority of the day. So like I said, also today will most likely be a fairly boring day, fairly sideways day. That's kind of what it was, right? For the most part, for the vast majority of the day, it was pretty just sideways, nothing happening. Again, and this usually happens right before, essentially a major announcement or, news or whatever you want to call it. In this case, of course, being CPI tomorrow, PPI, I believe Thursday, right? Pretty big announcements. An important day that a lot of people are waiting for, so people just kind of they kind of wait on the sidelines for it. So so let's figure out what we can expect. So guys, again, I want to make this very clear. Yesterday there was a comment that was actually saying like, oh, exactly, it didn't happen exactly anywhere near what you said. First of all, that was untrue. I mean, it was pretty close, but nonetheless, even with that being said, I did mention how yesterday the main reason for Tesla falling lower than I thought it would is mainly also because I did say it'll fall. I just didn't think it'll fall as hard as it did. Mainly because, the whole thing over Twitter happened over the weekend. That naturally, in my opinion, put a bit more weight on the stock. But, sometimes it is what it is, right? This is a market that I've always been warning people to be careful in because it can be very violent and not to be greedy. And this exactly is why, right? Nonetheless, let's go over the market. Let's see what happens. And I'll give you guys an update on what I personally have done so far for today in terms of trades. And yeah, let's go get this party started. So checking the usual, what we want to be looking at, right? Of course, the 21 EMA is still under it, unfortunately. So not good. That's a second day closure under it, right? Again, I have that 3-day rule-ish. I think tomorrow will be a very, very important day if we can get above it, right? If we cannot get above this 21 EMA tomorrow as well and we end the day below it, and especially if we end well below it, that in my opinion is not going to be the best of signs. So that's number one. Number two, which is a good sign, is that we are bouncing off the white part of the Bollinger Band. We are still on the upper end of it, which I actually think is a really good sign. Personally, I really like the Bollinger Band. I probably put the most weight on it personally, just from experience and what I've seen. I really like it. So the fact that Tesla's actually above the white line in the Bollinger Band and closed above it, most importantly, it's good. I actually like that. I'm actually very happy about that. So, a little bit of mixed signals, but that's mainly because I also believe the market is honestly just confused. The market doesn't really know where to go. And the main reason for that is because tomorrow is such a big day with these CPI numbers, right? That can usually determine where the market will go in that short term. So that's kind of like what pretty much everyone's waiting for. That's why today was kind of a sideways day. Very, very important to remember these kind of things, guys. But yeah, so that's that right there. Going over to the 10-day moving average below that and the 5-day moving average below that. So net bearish in my opinion. However, the Bollinger Band being my personal favorite, we are above that. So again, there's more signs pointing to downside than upside, but the one main thing that's pointing to potential upside after tomorrow's release on CPI is one of my personal favorite indicators. So we'll see what happens with that. Of course, this is one of those things where you'll never predict it correctly. Like if I was able to predict tomorrow's movement exactly and what the CPI will be exactly, trust me, I would be all inning 2 days to expire calls or puts on the indices right now and pretty much making billions or some shit like that. You know what I mean? No one can predict that. You have to keep that in mind. The idea is you want to figure out what catalysts, what things you want to look out for that can determine the direction, right? So in this case, what you want to be looking for is essentially a break to the upside or just the downside. And the way you do that on the short term, that's usually the easiest way, is by looking at the current levels of support and resistance and what needs to be broken in order for it to, for it to be a sustained move to the upside. So currently what we're kind of sitting in is kind of this a little bit of a channel on the downside, something like this, right? We're currently sitting in something like this. So this is going to be breaking to one of the sides very, very soon. Technically, this is a bear pennant. If you're going to be very technical about it, it is technically a bear pennant, which in that case would mean that this most likely will break to the downside, which is why there are more signs pointing to the downside than there are to the upside at the very moment with the indicators I just showed. However, with that being said, even though there's more things pointing to the downside than upside, there are things pointing to potential upside here as well, right? For instance, the Bollinger Band. Number two, we also have the RSI. RSI is kind of making its own little bear flag, if you will, here. But nonetheless, it is making higher highs and higher lows, which is pretty decent. Now, this final closure here, unfortunately, wasn't the best thing in the world, but you can see as the RSI is kind of, as a stock rather, is kind of going lower. You can see on the highs, right? It's like setting lower highs. The RSI is kind of making, very, arguably higher highs, right? And as the stock is kind of doing its thing, kind of ultimately making a lower low here, the RSI is still making a higher high. The stock made a higher low here. The RSI also made a higher low. So ultimately, the RSI is pointing that there is potentially going to be short-term movement to the upside, potentially. So that's something that the RSI is telling us. But again, there's a lot of things that are just contradicting each other, mainly, again, because the market is also just generally probably confused. It doesn't really know where to go until those numbers in the morning tomorrow are released. But in terms of just straight levels and levels you want to be looking out for, essentially, if Tesla loses $680, you can even argue at this point $685, but I'll put a bit more weight on the 680, but if it loses 685 to 680, well, then we're probably going to be looking for ultimately a short-term, maybe the rest of this week, ultimately a downwards move, maybe even next week as well, a downwards move for a little bit before we see any more upside first. However, if on the flip side, we can break north of this, and I would argue easily breaking above like maybe 705 to 710. If we can break above 705 to 710 and not just like get collapsed within, a few minutes, but like, more or less hold it. So something like, would be good to look at is a 15, maybe 30-minute candles, right? If one of these candles can start closing above this kind of general level, above 705, maybe even 710, but you can start with 705 in my opinion, but anywhere in that range, if you start seeing candles on the 15-minute to 30-minute start closing, then that's arguably a bullish sign. But again, we've had instances in this market, because we are essentially in a very volatile bear market, where even if you get those, sometimes, it can still be a false breakout. It's almost like a false positive in a way, right? So keep that in mind. And this is why I always have been warning a lot of caution lately for the past few weeks, mainly because this is a very violent market, and it's a market where if you're greedy, you will get destroyed. It's just that simple. So be very careful on that, guys. But ultimately, those are the levels you'd want to be looking out for, just through straight, support resistances in terms of what levels would need to be held, broken, etc., for further upside or downside. But ultimately, we are technically in a technical bear pennant. So technically the higher chance of this is to go to the downside, but again, it doesn't always have to be the case. But again, 705 unlocks more potential to the upside, and I would say losing 685 to 680 unlocks potential to the downside. Now, that's kind of what I'm seeing at the very moment. The daily, you can see as we kind of move over here, very confused daily as well, right? Pure red here, obviously a red candle here. We did close lower than we did yesterday as well. However, there was a decent amount of buying pressure coming in from the underneath the 700 range, so anywhere in the sixes you can see, which is pretty decent. That's pretty good to see. The RSI is looking a little bit bearish as well on the daily at least, but again, what we care about for now is for this week and for the short term, which I still think based on the RSI at least, looks like there might be potential for a potential move to the upside. But again, you want to see at least 705 being broken and held. That's extremely important. So those are the major things I'm personally looking out for. The volume today was pretty much average, in line, not crazy, not low but not high, just more or less where it usually is lately for the past few days. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment, ladies and gentlemen. The last thing that we can take a very quick look at, which unfortunately didn't save, so let me go ahead and see if I can bring it up through here, is going to be the visible volume range. Right now, this essentially what it determines is the fact that around this kind of 700 to 730-ish level, almost, a lot of volume, right? This is where a lot of trades happen, buys and sells. And then you can see as we get lower and lower and lower, the volume starts fading. So essentially, the lower we go, the less potential that there is for a bounce to happen. That's kind of what you want to look at. Personally, I don't put too much weight into this myself. A lot of people do. I don't. And the reason is because there's just a lot of times where I've seen this being quite contradictory. So something just, to add to the list of, variables to consider. Personally, I wouldn't put too much weight into this. I don't know, maybe I'm biased. I don't know what it is. I love the Bollinger Band, guys. I think this thing is fantastic. So essentially what you want to see is tomorrow, you want to hold the white line on the Bollinger Band ideally and not go too far below it. And if you do, kind of like today, end up closing back above it. And that's essentially what I'm currently looking at. Now, the final thing I'll mention is what I personally have done, right? So I did say how yesterday on this massive red day, I was selling puts, right? I sold about 4 puts yesterday. One of them being pretty aggressive and 3 of them being a little bit safer. One of them was at 700. So essentially, if Tesla ends under 700 by the end of this week, I will be buying shares, which I'm fine with because I literally have no shares at the moment. Well, I have like 20 shares on my other smaller account, but that's not a lot. Anyway, The other puts that I sold were in the mid to low 600s, right? Like 650. I had one at like 630. But the point is what I did today, because so one thing you can do, and maybe I could have waited until tomorrow to be, potentially, riskier, but I don't want to be too risky. But what I did was on Monday, because it was such a red day, I sold puts. Premium was very high, which is good. I took what I could, while being, in my opinion, relatively safe. And then because today, as predicted, was essentially a nothing day, like it was just straight sideways. What that does to premiums, which is good when you're selling options, is that it essentially, because it goes sideways and there's nothing really too much happening. So when you have like a day like this, for instance, like it's just pure sideways, right? What that does is it pretty much reduces the cost of the premium. It kind of reduces the value of it, especially if it's a weekly, right? Which is good for me as someone that's selling options. So what I did was I essentially took this opportunity to buy back 2 of the 4 that I have sold at a profit. So one of them was a decent profit. It was like 50% off. I bought it back. The other one was only like maybe 10 or 15%. Nothing crazy, right? It's relatively small profit, in all honesty, relative to my portfolio, of course. But it's better than nothing, right? It's better than being negative, of course. And the other 2 that I'm holding is a 700, which I'm just going to hold. I'm going to let it happen. If I buy shares, I buy shares. If I don't, I don't, right? It is what it is. I don't really mind if I buy 100 shares here. It's whatever. I mean, I have substantially more capital ready for the more downside potential. I just want to have something. I personally wouldn't mind that. And then the other one I'm holding, I believe, is the 660. I think is the last one. Yeah. So I have a 700 and a 660. So essentially, if Tesla ends under 660 by this week, end of this week, I'll be buying another 100 shares. That's kind of what my current positions. I did close out the ones below that, which was a 650 and a 630. Completely close those out just to be safe. If tomorrow's a red day, I'm going to resell fresh ones. If it's not, then I'll just ride it up, and I'll pretty much still making money on those premiums I did sell, or those puts that I did sell off of the premium, which means I just take the premium most likely and I walk away, and I'm still full cash. So that's essentially what I'm seeing, guys. Let me know what you think down below. And yeah, that's kind of my prediction at the moment. So going to be a very interesting day tomorrow, a very important day as well. So let's see what happens. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.